Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. Today we've got for you the latest review from the High Republic Phase 3. It is Defy the Storm by Tessa Gratton and Justina Ireland, the same duo who took on Path of Deceit way back in Phase 2. Make sure you hit that like button. Helps us out tremendously with our channel. Subscribe for more High Republic reviews. We've covered every single High Republic young adult and adult book, as well as comics and everything in the world of High Republic on this channel, and we're going to continue to do so for Phase 3. So if you'd like to hear our thoughts on the High Republic Phase 3, make sure you're subscribed. Comment below, let us know what you thought of Defy the Storm. Defy the Storm is an interesting book in the case that it is kind of a sequel to Out of the Shadows, which for many of you, you might not be familiar with, but that came back out all the way back in August of 2021. So it's been a minute since we've dealt with a lot of these characters. We haven't seen a lot of them in a while, and in that way, this book definitely has some catching up to do with the rest of what has been going on in the world of the High Republic. Sanak, walk me through what you thought while you were reading the High Republic Defy the Storm.
I think it's a great way of putting it that it does feel like a catch-up book, but I think this is one that by the end I felt like it was really worthwhile and it really connected to everything from phase 1 that I felt like had been kind of abandoned or pushed to the side. Out of the Shadows got us with characters that we were interested in phase 1, but they didn't necessarily push the narrative in a way that I really appreciated at the time. I think the whole concept of the gravities well, if you look back at our reviews, you'll see me always saying that things felt like they were cut out, like things were just missing in the story. But this felt like a book that I feel like it's finally paid off some of the promise of that book. Not entirely. I still think there are some things that weren't perfect about it, but I think Justina Ireland and Tessa Gratton together really did help solidify and kind of fill in some things. Now we understand that how the Nile were operating is a lot, and how they're like advancing their technology and their plans under Marchion Rowe as early as like the first half of phase 1 really was planned out for phase 3 in some ways, or even if it wasn't, it's been remedied in a really interesting way. What was really interesting for me is that once we got through all those reintroductions, we had our characters kind of converge together and their plots converge together before splitting apart and then coming back together. And I think that's what kept me really invested, even if some of the plot lines weren't super interesting right away for me, because then I knew that, all right, at some point, based on quite literally the the logic, the machinations of the occlusion zone of the Nile technology and all that, our characters have to regroup, and whatever they're working on for their mission, for their purposes, is somewhat tied in together. So I will say, because of that, this is a book that easily could have felt like, oh man, it's just another Out of the Shadow sequel. Instead, it caught up on a lot of stuff in phase 1 that I felt was, just not really touched up upon and fully expanded with a lot of its, final moments, and especially that epilogue there. And it caught us up with the characters that I felt like deserved a little bit more attention. And they definitely grew in this book for me. And I think that plot really was really well serviced as a result. So definitely enjoyed this read a lot more than I expected.
Especially when it starts out so slow. And I feel like the pacing of this book is a bit all over the place. There are a lot of really interesting plot points in this, and similarly to Out of the Shadows, there were some really big things that happen in that book, but they're all at the end. And it's all about how much of this actually carries into the future, right? Because there are some big things at the end of Defy the Storm. Without spoiling anything, there are some big implications for characters who aren't big parts of the YA universe. There are big moments for characters in the YA universe that have hopefully some weight to continue into the future, and some big discoveries made in this book that should help with the overall narrative and the plan to defeat the Nile. But just with the lack of seeing anything follow through from Out of the Shadows, I do get a little worried that some of the stuff we discover here is just a little padding for what we're also going to continue to discover in Tessa Gratton's other book coming out this summer. Like you were saying, the end of this book did capture that High Republic imagination for me. I was won over by the time it was over, because the first half I did struggle to get invested. Out of the Shadows coming out 2.5 years ago, it was weird picking up with a lot of these characters who we haven't seen since then. Vernestra maybe being one of the few, Vernestra and Avon, but they were in completely different places than we see them when we pick up here. So it feels like it's missing a lot of story in between Out of the Shadows and Mission to Disaster to where we are now. There is a nice story about moving on from grief and moving into what Vernestra is doing that I think could have been worth a book itself. Instead, we've had it sporadically sparsed out in other material and not given its own book. Vernestra being, to me, the most interesting character of this group, I wanted to see a bit more of her, and she does have some good stuff by the end, but I felt like the first half really underutilizes her in favor of trying to get you won back over by characters you haven't seen in 2.5 years and who, frankly, weren't very important originally. And so I think there's a lot of that with Defy the Storm, where it just feels like there's so many things you're trying to remember while you're reading. It does hamper the pace. The first 4 or 5 chapters are almost completely used to summarize what happened in Out of the Shadows. And because of that, it does start a little slow. However, I did enjoy the end. I enjoyed what we got for some character arcs and what the promise is for the future of these character arcs. And in a way, I do think this makes me more excited about some of the YA universe than I was previously without being like an exceptional book on its own. So let's move into our final scores here for Defy the Storm. Sanak, what would you give this out of 5? And also, we're going to start a new thing here. Where would you rank it amongst the YA and adult novels that have come out so far in the High Republic Phase 1, 2, and 3?
For my score for Defy the Storm, I think if we had just taken the beginning with the catch up with the characters and a little bit of the slower pacing of the plot, it would be pretty low. By the end, especially with how the plot accelerates, with how it kind of comes in and out, with all the crashing of the storylines and the characters and a lot of the payoffs from Phase 1, even partially some of the stuff from Phase 2, I did start to really enjoy the story, and I think I was left with a smile on my face by the end. So I would give this a 3.25. And then amongst all the young adult novels and the adult novels, it's tough to place it, but I would say it's just behind Into the Dark for me and just ahead of the High Republic Convergence.
A very good place to put it because I put it very similar place for me. It's about my 10th favorite of the 12. It's still pretty low. And again, a little bit of that has to do with the fact that I'm just not in love with these characters as much as I have fallen in love with other stuff. And Convergence was one I think I would have just above this because of how Cataclysm played out. That book aged a little better than it initially started. And Defy the Storm's in the same position. Whatever comes next really could solidify how strongly I feel about Defy the Storm because it has a really strong third act. I would give it about a 3 out of 5, being a little harsher critic in the last few book reviews. Now that we have reviewed so many more books, my scores have gotten tighter and tighter. And right now, I think it's a good book. I do think it's worth your time if you're interested in the High Republic and especially in the young adult side of the High Republic. Just know that it is going to be a bit of a slog at the beginning to get back into the story. And especially if you haven't read Out of the Shadows, you might be pretty confused with a lot of things that are going on here. Well, thank you so much for watching our review of Defy the Storm. Let us know what you thought in the comments. Were we too harsh on this book? Did we like it too much? Maybe you didn't like this at all. Make sure you like the video, helps us out tremendously, and subscribe for more. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we will see you all next time.